Hey everyone, it's Jackson from Smart Edition Academy, and in today's video we are going to be going over a PSAT 8 to 9 writing and language practice test. You can take this free PSAT 8 to 9 practice test along with me by using the link that's in the description below. Now for each of these questions I'll be explaining them one by one in detail and how I got the correct answer. And along that way, I'll be sharing some tips and tricks for answering questions just like the ones that you'll see on the real PSAT 8 to 9 correctly. Without further ado, let's get started. First thing that we need to do is read the first paragraph, and honestly we can read both, but let's just start with the first paragraph. So here we go. Our survey revealed some eye-opening results about young people and the role technology plays in their lives. Technology is the primary focus of young people today. In our survey, 85% of those questions said they spend their free time using technology in some way. Whether it's looking through social media sites, playing video games, texting friends, or surfing the web, our youth spends a horrifying amount of time on screens. The days of hanging with friends, being outside in nature, and reading a good book for fun seems to be long gone. Okay, now that we've read this first paragraph, let's get into the first question here. So, what is it asking here? So we can see that basically what it's saying is that there's two sentences here, and we're looking at this specific punctuation. Currently, there's a period that separates these two separate ideas, right here and right here, and it's asking what is the correct option for number one. And so I'll give you a few seconds to pick what you think would be the best option at this specific point. Alright, great. Hopefully what you picked was number three, or letter C, in the sense that lives, technology. Now, you might ask, why did you pick that answer? So, let's go through them. For first, no change. That would be leaving the period where it is and continuing on the sentence. Now, if you read both of these thoughts, you can see that they're pretty continuous in the sense that this thought is very similar to this thought. And so that means that they're going to have some sort of connection here because this is almost introducing the second thought, but if you read them, they're kind of repetitive. So it needs to be the second part is more of an emphasis of the first sentence rather than being its own unique thought. And so that's why I thought that it would not be no change. The second part is using a hyphen, which is typically used in order to create like links between two words, like years old is often used to create, that connection. And in this instance, it's not really separating a thought away, it's connecting these two ideas and again, emphasizing the thought. And emphasizing means that we're going to use a colon because a colon can either help create a list or it can help emphasize an additional point to the beginning sentence. And then the last one, a semicolon, and a great tip to use when you see a semicolon is to just replace it with an and read through the sentence and or a but. Either way, you want to use some sort of conjunction there and read through it and see if it makes sense. And so in this case, it doesn't really make sense. And the role technology plays in their lives and technology is the primary focus of young people today. That would just be repeating what was already previously said and would be completely unnecessary. And so we went with C for this question. Now the next one, for number two, we can look and say, okay, it's asking, the writer is considering adding the sentence below at point 2 in the passage. It says only 5% claim that they read actual books, 7% hang out with friends, and only 3% do some sort of physical activity. And we're adding it right after this in our survey, this sentence, so right here, and saying, should the writer make this revision? So I'll give you a few seconds to pick your answer. We are going to look through each of these questions. We're going to say, okay, do you think we should add this sentence? And ultimately, the answer that you should pick right away is yes, because it's helping to explain the statistic in a greater way and give more supporting details about what does this mean? Why does it matter that they use a large percent of their free time using technology? And so that helps clear out 3 and 4. But let's also read the reasoning. The sentence is relevant but would serve a better purpose later within this passage. Now, if we just do a quick scan of that second, we can see that it's talking about cyberbullying, and that wouldn't really make sense in that second portion. And so that's a little trick if you see that and you're like, I don't know if it's relating to that passage because I haven't read through the whole thing yet. Do a quick little scan, see if you can get a bit of a summary, and ultimately, even in the beginning, you can read both paragraphs if you think that would help you out. And then the last one, the sentence is not relevant to information for the argument. We know that's not true because this is talking about the exact survey in the previous sentence. And so obviously this is going to have some impact that's relating to that. So now our choice is, does it explain the other 15% to have a proper argument, or is the sentence providing supporting details about that level of activity that children have without technology? And so if we think about the first one, if it's explaining the other 15% of the results, then wouldn't that mean that it would have to be exclusive in the sense that can you use technology and also read books? And the answer to that is yes, you can. And so if it's explaining the other 15% of those results, that wouldn't be a proper argument to refute or to support their argument. In a sense, it would just be explaining that some people don't do that, or and if they do, maybe they also use technology as well. And so that one doesn't really make sense. It's a little bit foggy. Now let's read the second one. The sentence would provide supporting details about the level of activity children have without technology. That one makes a little bit of sense because it's talking about reading actual books, hanging out with friends, and doing some sort of physical activity, which are all things that you have to do without the technology. So that one would make sense, and we're going to go with B. Now, number 3. We're looking at this term, a horrifying amount of time on screens. And so when we read this initially, it seems like an inappropriate adjective because it's kind of looking at it through a weird kind of lens. And so it's asking, okay, is horrifying the right word that matches this end of this, this adjective that can explain the amount of time? And so I'll give you a few seconds to pick what you think would be the best option for this specific question. All right, now let's read through it. Our youth spends a horrifying amount of time on screens. That would be no change, okay? Now, an interesting one. It seems, like I said a little bit previously, a bit inappropriate for the specific terminology. If it's like horrifying, then it seems like we're demonizing the amount of time, which is what this argument is kind of saying. But it doesn't really make sense for the amount of time on screen. So let's read through the other options, and maybe that is the right answer. So let's get back to it. Our youth spends a ridiculous amount of time on screens. Now, that one sounds very similar to a horrifying amount on time on screens. And there's a little bit of a tip there that if you're looking at vocab words, and especially through vocab questions, if you see two words that are kind of synonyms or very, similar, if they're both on the answer sheet, they can't be right because if you pick one of them, then the other one seems applicable too. And so if you say a horrifying or you see a ridiculous, it's kind of the same meaning there. So initially, when I was reading through this, I crossed both of them off because I said they're kind of doing the same thing with the same adjective describing that time. And so for number 3, our youth spends a decent amount of time on screens. Now that one's just, it's just not enough. We're trying to talk about how impactful technology has on the lives of children, especially young people. And if we're saying that they spend a decent amount of time, it's almost like it doesn't describe enough. It's like, oh, okay, like they spend enough time, but so what? And so the last one was the one that I actually picked, an inordinate. And this causes you to have a bit of a vocab background, but if you don't know what this word means, you can kind of use your language knowledge to know that ordinate probably means, something like ordinary, so normal, and in would be the opposite in the sense that it would be the opposite of normal. So not normal, it would be not ordinary. So that kind of makes a little bit of sense. Our youth spends an unnormal or, an inordinate amount of time on screens. We spend more time on screens than most people think is normal. And so that's what I picked ultimately because I thought that was the most answer, or that was the answer that best described through this specific noun. Now, as we go to number 4, it's asking about the title. So, okay. Which title for Natalie Greenberg should the writer add at point 4 to improve the credibility of the passage? Okay, so now we're looking at number 4. We're going to read the second passage. Natalie Greenberg from the Perkins Institute claims that, quote, studies have shown a direct correlation between too much screen time and rising depression rates among teens. Greenberg explains screen time has an impact of how they view themselves. This is based on the amount of likes someone gets on social media sites or the number of texts someone reads from his or her peers. Cyberbullying is also a big issue with technology. Quote, kids are able to freely say anything they want behind a screen, Greenberg states. Since they are bullying from a keyboard, kids are no longer exposed to social cues like facial expressions and body language, which may stop the behavior. As a result, cyberbullying has become rampant, which has led to more depression. End of quote. Okay, So our question here is regarding this fourth little bracket. And it's saying, which title for Natalie Greenberg should the writer add at point 4 to improve the credibility of this passage? All right, so go ahead and pick your best answer. So as we walk through this, let's think about it. So Natalie Greenberg from the Perkins Institute. Okay, so we might not know what that is, and that's okay, but some sort of scientific institute claims that the studies have shown a correlation between screen time and depression rates among teens. Okay, so when we think about what is someone who knows what they're talking about that's looking at depression rates and correlations between screen time, what are we going to call that person? And so you might think, okay, let's look through our answer choices. So I initially looked at right away and crossed off faculty and I crossed off former graduate because both of those terms aren't improving the credibility. It's almost like just an add-on, like, oh, she's just a faculty, or she's a former graduate, which might be important for something, but it's not really improving the credibility. I'm not going to believe her more because she's a faculty member, not necessarily for the specific quote. And so then we're stuck with a researcher or a clinical psychologist. And so this one's kind of a feels question, but you can also think about it more directly for the application. So if Natalie Greenberg's a researcher, you might be like, okay, that makes a little bit of sense. She's found a direct correlation between the screen time and the rising depression, but that's how they're going to get you because you should be thinking right away, improve the credibility of someone that's certified, someone that has lots of meaning, someone who knows a lot. And in this case, the correct answer would be a clinical psychologist because it's someone who has that degree. It's more believable when you hear something from a doctor, especially a clinical doctor, and that's going to be improving the credibility of Natalie Greenberg and allow the reader to believe the quote even more. And as we move into number 5, it's asking about the pronoun they at point 5 and who basically is what it's referring to. And so Greenberg explains screen time has an impact on how they view themselves. And now this is important because this is something that we can kind of use through our own context clues. Read through each of them and give me or put down your answer the best that you think fits. So Greenberg explains that screen time has an impact on how they view themselves. So who views themselves is basically what it's asking. How does screen time who does screen time impact? What is this about? And so is it about Greenberg? And instantly you should be thinking, no, it's not about how she views herself. Is it about how does technology view itself through screen time? No, that doesn't really make sense. Through teens, oh, okay, that one kind of makes sense to me because, we're talking about young children, how screens have impacted them. That one makes sense. And the last one would be no one. It is unclear. And given that 3 or C was so descriptive and it matched what we were looking for, no one, it would be incorrect. We're looking at teens here. Now, as we move on to number 6, we're looking at where the writer wants to insert a quote. And so we're going to look at point 6 here. So let's read the sentence before just to remind ourselves. This is based on the amount of likes someone gets on social media sites or the number of texts someone receives from his or her peers. And so this is number 6. And saying the writer wants to insert the quote below at point 6 in the passage. Okay, let's read it. The feedback kids get from technology becomes the barometer for their self-worth, which could lead to depression. So the prior question that we read is talking about how peers, especially in how many texts they received and how many likes they get, is impacting these teens. And so this is saying the feedback that the kids get from technology becomes the barometer. And so if you know what a barometer is, it basically measures pressure. So it's kind of just a measuring tool. It's kind of how you can think about it. And hopefully you were able to use your context clues for that. So it becomes a measure for their self-worth, which could lead to depression. And that kind of makes sense. If we aren't getting, if kids don't get lots of texts and they don't get lots of, likes on social media, it's almost a sensor for how much are they worth, and that could definitely lead to depression. And so when I initially read this, we're going to say these no's are going to be incorrect because this quote does not provide relevant information. That's not true. It's very relevant to this specific passage. And no, the passage already has several quotes and would discredit the argument by overwhelming with information. That's not true. Using quotes is a very great way in order to have specific information that can help be told and give you credibility, kind of like that we looked at the last question. And so those two would not be correct. And so we looked at the next two. We know that it has to be yes, but what we're looking at here is, which one describes it better. And so let's look at the first one. Yes, the quote strengthens the argument by emphasizing how the feedback from technology is negatively affecting the kids. Now, right away, that looks like exactly kind of what we just talked about, and you should be going through in your own head when you're doing this on your own, and reading through it. Does this make sense? Let's look at the second one. Yes, the quote provides an explanation for the survey's results. Now, the survey that we took that was relevant was in the first paragraph, and it doesn't really have too much to do with this specific idea, so that one would not make sense. Cyberbullying is also a big issue with technology. Okay, so we're looking at this word big, that's exactly what we're looking for here. And so it's saying, okay, cyberbullying, which is also kind of prevalent to this depression, looking at the last quote that we inserted, is also a big issue with technology. We're going to say, okay, what is there needs to be a word switch? Does it make sense? And so why don't you guys put down what you think? So the first one would be no change. And when I read it, cyberbullying is also a big issue with technology. It initially makes sense. I don't see anything wrong with the verbiage, and when I read it, and it kind of makes sense. The adjective makes sense. It's a big issue. So let's read through these choices. The next choice would be worse. So cyberbullying is also a worse issue with technology. That wouldn't make that much of a sense because we're not arguing that the rising depression is more important than the cyberbullying. We're kind of just saying that they're both big issues that relate with the technology. So that one would not be the correct choice there. For C, cyberbullying is also an unacceptable issue with technology. That one doesn't really make sense either because if you think about it, we're not saying that it's acceptable or unacceptable. We're just saying that the screen time and the amount of technology that are used in these young children is it's a big issue, and this is leading to things like cyberbullying and through depression. And we're not saying it's unacceptable, although it is unacceptable. It doesn't exactly fit through with this sentence. And the last one, parental cyberbullying is also a parental issue with technology. That might be true that it is a parent's issue, but what this is talking about more you know, is this an adjective that makes sense? Is it really a big issue with technology? And yes, if we read on, it's talking about the kids and how they're fully being able to say whatever they want. And so we're going to say no change here. Okay, for our next one on this passage, we're going to be looking at this number 8 right here. It's saying kids are able to freely say anything they want behind a screen. Okay, and it's saying, okay, how can we do this? Greenberg states is what comes after it, since they are bullying from behind a keyboard. Okay, so why don't you guys take some time and see what you get. Kids are able to freely say anything they want behind a screen, and we have a comma, and then we have an end quote. Greenberg states a comma and an end quote. So our first choice would be no change. We'll come back to that. Here we have a screen, comma, and then the end of a quote, and we have yet. So yet Greenberg states, well, this is since they are bullying from a keyboard. It talks about how they're able to freely say anything they want behind a screen. This is the second thought is supporting this first thought, and so it's almost like okay, um, so this would be so Greenberg states kids are freely able to say anything they want behind a screen. So since they're bullying from a keyboard, they're no longer exposed to social cues like facial expressions and body language. That one doesn't really make any sense either because we're not saying that since they're able to say nothing behind a screen, they can bully behind a keyboard. No, we're saying that they can since they can say anything they want behind a screen, they're also able to bully behind a keyboard, and that gives them less exposure to social cues. Say, okay, that one doesn't really make 100% sense. And then we'll look at the last one. But Greenberg states, well, no, that doesn't make sense because these two thoughts are pretty cohesive. And so our correct answer here is going to be no change because they both make sense. And when we have Greenberg states, it's giving that credibility back. And it makes sense if we're talking about, do we need a word here? And the answer would be no. All right, and our last question for this specific passage, another punctuation question. Here we go. As a result, cyberbullying has become rampant, which has led to more depression. Okay. What exactly is wrong here? And so we talked about this earlier with this colon. So colons are used for two different things, for emphasis and for lists. And so for this specific question, we're not really we're not really giving a list here and we're not really emphasizing a specific thought. We're just saying as this result, this is what we're talking about, and this is, it's leading to more depression. So having no change would not really make sense. And so the second choice, B, would say that the result, comma, cyber. And so that looks awesome to me because what I know that we use comments for is that it's kind of a way to set off an introductory phase. And so typically we use an introductory thought, we put a comma there, and then we continue on. So as a result, comma, cyberbullying has become more rampant. That made more sense to me. So I'm going to select that one and we'll go through it. The next one, as a result, and then we use a semicolon. And just for that same kind of trick that you can use right away in your head, let's replace it with and read it. As a result, and cyberbullying. That doesn't make sense. Right away, think about it, right? It doesn't make sense at all. And the last one is kind of that similar thing. Just read it. As a result, cyberbullying has become more rampant. It doesn't really make sense. Why would we put a question mark there? We're not asking any questions there. We're trying to have a continuation with an introductory phase. And so that's going to, what would be your answer is having that comma to kind of cut off this first phrase and then to introduce this next thought. And so that's going to be our last one for this page. And then we're going to conclude with a few of these summary ones. It says the writer wants to include a brief statement at the end of the passage. Which choice would effectively conclude this passage? Okay, let's read them here. Now, our first one says, the survey results show that the children are too highly influenced by their technology. At this rate, kids and teens will be too vulnerable to mental illnesses because of a lack of social connection. Okay, let's go B. Technology is here to stay and is only going to become more entrenched in our society. It will continue to impact our youth in ways we can't even fathom. Now C. The lack of activities children participate in is a reflection of technology availability. The widespread use of technology used to socialize is hurting our kids' future. And the last one, there is an alarming result of the survey and genuine feedback to show why technology is harming children and teens. By limiting their screen time, we could avoid increased depression diagnoses. All right, let's get right back into it. We're going to say, okay, for the first one, the survey results show that children are too highly influenced by their technology. And we can see that two of these are reflecting back on the survey. This one's saying the survey, and this one's also saying the survey. And that's kind of just not a great way that we would want to impact this. And it's kind of the similar way that we approach the adjective one. If we see two things that are talking about the same one, and they're kind of saying the same thing. This one's saying at this rate the kids are going to be too vulnerable. And this one's saying, okay, we need to, if we limit their screen time, we can avoid the depression. This one's talking about mental illnesses. It's almost like they're restating and they just changed the words around for this A and D. And so initially I would say that these two cannot be right since they're both saying kind of the same thing. And so that leaves us with B and C. B is a summary in the sense that it's kind of just introducing and summarizing all the ideas together into one thought. It's saying technology is here to stay, and it's only going to become more entrenched in our society. And entrenched is going to become more involved, if you don't know what that word would mean. And it will continue to impact our youth in ways we can't even fathom. And that initially is what I chose right away, because I thought that it summarized the ideas into two sentences that are unique, and they talk specifically about how this is going to have an impact in the future and why it matters. And that's exactly what we're looking for in a conclusion. But we'll check C. It says the lack of activities children participate in is a reflection of technology availability. Okay, so the lack of availabilities children participate in is a reflection of technology availability. Well, if he says up here in our survey, it says that they use technology in some way, and that doesn't necessarily always have to be in a negative sense. And then it says the widespread use of technology used to socialize is hurting our kids' future. And that might be true. Both of these statements might be true, but it's asking for what would effectively conclude the passage. And when we effectively conclude a passage, we're looking to come up with unique thoughts that help bundle all of our ideas together. And that's going to be the correct answer, is going to be B, because it comes together and brings everything. Read the passage below and answer the following questions. Desserts are known as the forbidden food in most diets, but dark chocolate is a sweet that people can enjoy because of its undeniable health benefits. Categorized as an antioxidant, dark chocolate is known to fight free radicals, the unbalanced compounds created by cellular processes that can harm the body. This amazing sweet treat is also known to lower blood pressure, improve blood flow, and reduce heart disease risk in people. Studies have shown that dark chocolate can even improve people's brain function. There is considerable evidence that dark chocolate can provide powerful benefits, but it is still loaded with calories, so consuming too much is not recommended. People can reap the benefits of dark chocolate by eating it in moderation. Alright, so why don't you guys see what you get for number one. Alright, great. Let's get right back into it. So, awesome way to remember this, how I've always remembered it too. Deserts, like the land with the camels and the lots of sand, is going to have one S. The easiest way to remember this is that a dessert is like strawberry shortcake. And so that's why it needs two S's. And so the correct answer here would be C, desserts, because there's two S's, strawberry shortcake. And that's an easy way that you can remember it in your head. Always has helped me, when you're reading and you can't tell the difference, strawberry shortcake. And so we're not going to go through the other options just because I gave you guys that one. All right, number two. The writer wants to add the information below at point 2 in the passage. That's right here. Let's read the previous sentence. But dark chocolate is a sweet that people can enjoy because of its undeniable health benefits. Okay, what does the writer want to add? The average American consumes 22 pounds of candy a year, or an estimated 9 grams of candy per day. Should the writer make this revision? All right, I'll give you guys a bit of time. So at number 2, are we adding that the American consumes 22 pounds of candy a year? Now that kind of seems like a negative fact to me. Um, and so this kind of seems to be taking away from the idea that dark chocolate is enjoyable and that it has health benefits. So I initially crossed off 1 and 2, or A and B, because the authors or the writer should not make this revision because it's not helping their case regarding the dark chocolate. Now for C, the statement is a supporting detail, but it would better be placed later within the passage. Now we know that's not true. The rest of the passage is talking about, um, why dark chocolate is so important and what the benefits are, um, and talking about, it's important to eat in moderation. And so it's not really a supporting detail, and nor is it better placed within the passage. And so that leaves us by a process of elimination D. But let's read through it and make sure it makes sense. No, the statement does not support the main idea that dark chocolate is good for you. And that's kind of the same idea that we kind of just talked about. It's not that great of a fact. It's almost taking away from the idea of health benefits with the quote unquote forbidden food. So that's going to be our answer here. Now for number 3, categorized in an antioxidant, dark chocolate is known to fight free radicals. And then a period, and then it says the unbalanced compounds created by cellular processes that can harm the body. All right, we'll get right back into it. Now, right away, like I said, you should see that there's a problem here because it's almost like separating two thoughts that are the same. They're the same thing. And so it says known to fight free radicals. And initially, I don't know what free radicals are. And this is almost explaining the free radicals, the unbalanced compounds created by cellular processes that can harm the body. Say, okay, that makes a little bit of sense. And so what this is, it's almost like a description in the sense. And it helps to emphasize a thought, or in this case, it's a description, and so we need to have a pause here and then conclude, continue the sentence. And so no change would not be right because we're not really, we're not ending the sentence and then starting a new thought. They're cohesive, and so we don't need a period. The second one, um, radicals, comma, the unbalanced compounds created by cellular processes that can harm the body. That one sounds wonderful because when we're looking in order to emphasize a thought, and especially through a description, we're going to use a comma, which can help, make a small break within that sentence that can separate the words and the clauses. In this sense, we're using an idea in a description. And so I initially chose comma, but we're going to keep going through and reading. Radicals, colon, the unbalanced compounds created by cellular processes that can harm the body. Now, this one's kind of a tricky one because we talked about this earlier, that a colon can help to emphasize a thought. And you might think, okay, this is emphasizing what free radicals are. But think about it. A colon has to emphasize everything in the sentence. So categorizing it as an antioxidant, dark chocolate is known to fight free radicals. And so if we put a colon there, it's almost like there needs to be a list, or there needs to be a short and sweet emphasis that helps the whole sentence. In this case, it's only a description. And then the last one, using a hyphen, we talked about this earlier as well. It's kind of like a separating, in order to help, separate different thoughts or to connect two words. And in this case, It's not the best choice in order to continue the sentence because, again, we're describing the previous noun, or in this case, it's a free radical. And when we describe something, we're going to use a comma to separate the two ideas. And let's go ahead and move on. All right. The writer is debating on separating the passage into two paragraphs at point 4. Should the writer make this revision? Okay, so the unbalanced compounds created by cellular processes that can harm the body. Right here, this amazing street is also known to, that's kind of the next sentence, so as we think about it, let's go ahead and you guys pick your best answer. All right, right back in. The writer is debating on separating the passage into two paragraphs at point 4. So this one's talking about the sentence before, about how it has an antioxidant that can help fight unbalanced compounds that can harm the body. And this one's saying it's also known to, and so if it's saying also, it means it's referring back to the previous sentence. And so it wouldn't really make sense to just split it into two paragraphs when they're talking about the exact same thing, and it's referring to the previous thought. And so should this author make the revision? Our answer should be no, but we need to pick the correct reasoning, but that helps eliminate A and B. So for C and D, no, the passage would not make sense because the topic and details would be separated. Okay, that may make a little bit of sense, okay? But let's read note D and see if that's also a better answer. No, the separating the passage would be an uneven divide as the topic and some supporting details have already been mentioned. Now that one makes a little bit more sense because separating the passage would be an uneven divide as the topic and some supporting details have already been mentioned. If we split this right here, it's almost like we're taking away from that whole first paragraph because, hey, you know, we talked about this helps fight free radicals, it has health benefits. It's almost like this is more supporting details, and it would create this weird divide between the main idea of this topic and then all the supporting details. And so that would be the best answer. This one's saying it would not make sense because the topic and details were separated. That may be true, but remember, this is what's the better answer. Sometimes you have to look at, and that's why they get you here. You know, that is true that the topic and details would be separated, but some of them have already been mentioned. That's true, and it would create this uneven divide as we talked about earlier. All right, into number 5. This amazing sweet treat is also known to lower blood pressure, improve blood flow, and reduce heart disease risk in people. Go ahead and give your guys best shot on this one. So right away we can see that no change would not be the correct answer because even when you read it, I feel out of breath. And hopefully you can kind of read this in your own head and realize, hey, there's something missing here. You know, also known to lower blood pressure, improve blood flow, and reduce heart disease risk in people. I sound like I'm saying something wrong or there seems to be something incorrect. So no change would not be the right answer. 2, lower blood pressure and improve blood flow and reduce heart disease. Now that one's not right either because now we're just having a run-on sentence having and it doesn't make sense. That's not how we separate thoughts. And when we use a list, which is what we're using here, we're listing 3 different things. We're going to use commas to separate each of the ones, and that's why C is going to be the correct answer here. Lower blood pressure, comma, improve blood flow, comma, and reduce heart disease. And those all make very much sense. And the last one, lower blood pressure, and we have a hyphen, improve blood and reduce heart disease risk. That's not going to be the correct answer. That's only separating one of the thoughts, and the other 2 are still connected in kind of an uneasy way. So our best answer here would be C. For 6, studies have shown that dark chocolate can even improve people's brain functions. Okay, see what you guys get here. So it can help improve people's brain function. And so what we're looking at here is people's without any, any apostrophes. Is that the correct function? Or is it going to be multiple peoples with an apostrophe at the end, people with an apostrophe with an S, and people's apostrophe S? So initially, you can see that there is a problem with this because it's saying people's brain function. Well, whose brain function? That's an easy question to ask. Is it asking who? In this case, it is. Whose brain function? And you're saying, okay, it's the people's. Kind of draw an arrow back to that on your own test. And so that means that no change is not going to be the right answer. And then also we can look at this last one, people's apostrophe S. We know that that's incorrect because when there's a word that ends with an S and it is multiple of them or denoting ownership, we just put the comma or the apostrophe, excuse me, at the end, almost like in B. And then we finally can look at, okay, well, we have B and C left. Now, is this an ownership thing? And you should say yes, because it's indicating a possession and it can help, or sometimes apostrophes are used to create a contraction. But in this case, whose brain function? It's the people's brain function. So it's the people brain function, and who's the people? It's their brain function. So it's not the people's brain function, it's the people apostrophe s brain function. And so an easy way to think about that is just the ownership. Put someone's name there, for example. So you're not gonna, put Bob in. It's gonna be Bob's brain function, not Bob's. With there's gonna be this extra kind of apostrophe that wouldn't make sense there. And so we're gonna put this apostrophe s in order to denote that ownership of the brain function. All right, for 7. Which statement, if added at point 7 in the passage, would help support the previous sentence? So the previous sentence is talking about how it improves people's brain functions. Now, which one's going to help support the previous sentence? A. When participants of a study were given a test, half of the participants were provided a dark chocolate bar prior to the examination. The participant who had eaten the antioxidants before answering the questions did significantly better than the participants who had not. B. Researchers spent several years putting together a study to discover how antioxidants affect memory, mood, and weight. C. This is why dark chocolate-covered fruit is recommended as a helpful snack during your school day. D. One study demonstrated that the increase of cacao consumption with antioxidants increased brain waves in areas related to cognition and memory. Go ahead and give you guys your best shot. All right. This one might be a little bit of a tougher question because it seems like some of them can be descriptive, but not all of them are going to give the best answer, in this case, the right answer. So here we go. When participants of a study were given a test, half of the participants were provided a dark chocolate bar prior to the examination. The participants who had eaten the antioxidants before answering the questions did significantly better than the participants who had not. Okay, great. Here's the problem with this one. Yes, it would be great if it didn't talk about the specific antioxidants, because when we looked at the antioxidants, if we look previously up at the passage, it's talking about fighting free radicals. This is talking about a totally different thing about how dark chocolate can improve the brain functions, and that's what we're looking at. And so that's why A is wrong, and that's going to be a common choice among many people. B. Researchers spent several years putting together a study to discover how antioxidants affect memory, mood, and weight. Like, okay, again, we're mentioning these antioxidants, and that might be, prevalent to this, but this doesn't really make sense. How does it affect memory, mood, and weight? It doesn't really give us any information. This is kind of just a blanket statement. So that's not going to be the best answer. C. This is why dark chocolate covered fruit is recommended as a helpful snack during your day. Okay, great. That might give an example of why it might improve, how it can improve people's brain functions and why people eat dark chocolate. But it's not really helping support the previous sentence. And so let's look at D. One study demonstrated that the increase of cacao consumption, so that would be dark chocolate, with the antioxidants increased brain waves in area related to cognition and memory. And so if we're looking specifically at brain function is going to be looking at things like memory, things like cognition. And so those should be kind of a pointer right to you that, hey, this is going to be the correct answer because it's talking about how brain function works with the increase of dark chocolate. And that's going to be the correct answer. For 8, there is considerable evidence that dark chocolate can provide powerful benefits, but it is still loaded with calories. So consuming too much is not recommended. And so is there going to be a change here? Go ahead and give me your best answer. All right, great. Now, for this one, there is considerable evidence that dark chocolate can provide powerful benefits. Great, that's kind of a thought, and it's awesome that they separated it with a comma. Blank, it is still loaded with calories. So a great way to look at this, is this a positive thought or is it a negative thought? So in this case, it's detracting from the statement. So it's taking away from the idea that it has powerful benefits, saying, but it actually is still loaded with calories. So don't eat too much, is kind of what it's saying. And so initially, right away, I said, hey, this one's fine. It's saying but, so it's kind of, saying, there's a little bit of a drawback to it, though. So I initially chose no change. But like normal, we need to go through all of them. So for B, 4. So there is considerable evidence that dark chocolate can provide powerful benefits. 4. It is still loaded with calories. No, that doesn't make sense. and it is still loaded with calories, that one wouldn't make sense either because we're not saying that it has powerful benefits and it's loaded with calories. No, we're saying this is bad. It kind of has a takeaway still. It still has lots of calories. And because wouldn't it's not that would be explaining why does it have powerful benefits. But no, we're not saying because it's still loaded with calories, so consuming too much is not recommended. That wouldn't make sense. We're saying it has powerful benefits, but it still has calories, so be careful. And so that's why no change would be the best answer for the specific question. For number 9, we're saying, okay, it's going to be a spelling question here because when we look at it, we're seeing, okay, it's looking at, how does this work? Here we go. People can reap the benefits of dark chocolate. I'm just going to stop right there because that's all we need to read. And so go ahead and give your best answer. This one's kind of just a knowledge question. You either know this or you don't. All right, that should have given you guys enough time. And so if you know what this or if you know what this word means, um, then it's a common phrase, you reap what you sow. And this is kind of in the same sense. It's saying people can reap the benefits of dark chocolate by eating it in moderation. So you can still gain these benefits just by being a little bit more careful because, like it says in the previous sentence, it's still loaded with calories. So don't eat too much. Now, if you look at this word, it might seem a little bit uneasy to you right away. And that's kind of how I felt too. And I didn't initially know exactly how to spell this word. But I kind of used some context clues or some knowledge, some previous knowledge to help solve this problem. And so this initially looked wrong because if you think about the word reap what you sow, it just doesn't seem, I hadn't seen that word before. And so hopefully this can help pick B, which would be the correct answer here. Um, but ultimately, these questions for spelling is more of a process of elimination in your own head. And the best way that you can tackle these, if you have absolutely no idea, think and read through each of the words in your head and just try to give your own best spelling of the word. And ultimately, if you can't come up with something, come up with the word that seems most familiar to you. And so in this case, I didn't think that the word had a W-R before it. I thought that reap would just be R-E something. And in this initial one, R-E-E-P, it didn't look right to me. And so that's why I chose B as my answer. All right, and our last in-text one for this one, it's saying people can reap the benefits of dark chocolate by eating it in moderation! Exclamation point. Okay, and it's saying, is this the correct, punctuation, or is this how we use the tone in the transition? All right, so I'll give you guys a second and pick your best answer. All right, so people can reap the benefits of dark chocolate by eating it in moderation, like we said. An exclamation point seems a little bit odd, just because it's like we're not exclaiming that we need to eat it in moderation, because ultimately many of us probably wish we could eat dark chocolate as much as we wanted. Um, but it's saying you can reap the benefits by eating it in moderation. And when you read it like that, kind of just listen to if you read it out loud without what's given. How do you end that sentence? Is it a question? No. Is it an exclamation? No. Is it a quote? No. And so that's kind of an easy way to go through it in a sense. Read these out loud, or if you're in your test, don't read it out too loud, but think about it in your own head if you read the sentence, and if you need to whisper it even to yourself. That might help you pick the best choice here because we're not exclaiming, we're not questioning, and we're not quoting. It's just going to be a period at the end of the sentence. And that's going to be your last one for this one. So as we go into the next set, let's keep our heads up and let's get right into it. We're going to read the whole passage first and then we'll go through each of these. In the past 10 to 15 years, koalas have been repeatedly harmed or killed in traffic incidents. When the animals cross busy roads, highways, and intersections to get their food source, the eucalyptus tree, many of them meet a terrible fate. Australian developers have been taking over koala habits to keep up with the country's booming population. This has resulted in the endangerment of the country's most beloved animal. Concerned individuals have taken action by creating koala pathways, routes traveling over roads, highways, and intersections to ensure koalas keep safe. However, koala hospitals have been established in these areas to rehabilitate the injured animals. Awesome. And so, as we read this, just a little bit of a tip. Think about if you can summarize it in your own words and how you can come this together because that might be a question at the end. How can we, what is this main topic and how can we relate to it? And this even helps us with question 1, which says, which option would best function as a topic sentence at the beginning of the passage to unite the information? And so reading the whole passage, it's great to know what's the main idea and why does this matter? And if you can answer those two questions, that should help you with number one. And so I'll give you guys a few seconds to do your best and answer this one. All right, great. Let's look right into it. So the main idea of this passage is basically talking about how um, traffic incidents have killed koalas and people have tried to find solutions in order to save them. So let's look at A. Over 4,000 koalas are hurt or injured each year by automobiles. Well, that's kind of just like a fact. It's not really uniting the information, so I crossed that one off right away. B. Koalas spend most of their time in trees but need to occasionally travel across roads to move around. That one doesn't really make sense because it's not talking about how, you know, how they get injured and why they get injured and what people are doing. So not really. C. Human encroachment on natural habitats has negatively impacted the koala population. Now I love this. I love this introduction because it's saying, okay, human encroachment. It's kind of what this is talking about. Things like traffic accidents, which are by humans, have negatively impacted the koala population, and that's true. They've killed them, and when they cross these roads to get to their food, they meet a terrible fate. But just let's check D and make sure that that's not the right answer as well. D. Australia's building development projects have tripled over the last decade. Okay, well, I mean, that might help with this specific sentence right here, talking about how developers have been taking over their habitats, but it's not uniting all the information. And so our best answer here is going to be C. All right, number 2. In the past 10 to 15 years, and it's asking, is that 2 right here the correct word for this sentence? So I'll give you guys a few seconds. All right, let's get right into it. This one should be a pretty straightforward one. Initially, right away, when you look at it, you can say that D is going to be incorrect. We know that that's not a word. For C, we know that too, T-O-O, is like too much. It's explaining something because it's in, there's too much of it. It's not going to be using from 10 to 15 years. We're not going to use this word. This is a different meaning of the word too. And for B, we can say TWO is going to be like the number 2 from the past 10 to 15. That wouldn't make sense if there was the number. And so the correct answer here is going to be no change. We're going to keep it past 10 to 15 years. And hopefully you can just identify that as how we're going to separate these two numbers, is typically we just use this spelling of 2. All right, let's move on to the next one. When the animals cross busy roads, highways, and intersections to get their food source. So we're looking at this word busy roads, and we're seeing, do we need to change it? And if so, what should we change it to? Busy, and this one's hyphening busy roads. Now, right away, you should say that's not right, because busy roads is not like a something that you would join together to create a compound word. Something like eye opener you would connect, or 22-year-old is kind of something you would want to connect. Not busy roads, because busy is describing roads. It's an adjective for the noun road. So no change would be incorrect. Busy roads, if you connect the words, you guys should know that's not a word. So you can't just put two things together because one describes the other. For C, that's going to be your correct choice here. Busy roads. This is simple. And then this last choice, busy apostrophe roads, that should just look wrong. And all right, let's move on to 4. And intersections to get their food source, the eucalyptus tree. Many of them meet a terrible fate. Okay, we're looking at here, source, comma, the. Is that the correct reasoning? If not, best choice, go at it. Let's see what you guys got. So it's basically saying when they cross all these things to get their food source, what is this saying? When to get their food source, and what is the eucalyptus tree? That's their food source. So it's almost like a description, right? It's describing what is their food source? It's the eucalyptus tree. And this kind of reminds me of one of the previous questions that we looked at. It's a description. And so when we're describing, last time we were looking at dark chocolate, the antioxidants. This time we're looking at the food source. The eucalyptus tree is their food source. And so we're going to put a comma, give the description, a comma, and continue the thought. It's almost an interjection. And this is interjecting it, and it's describing this specific thing. And so this right away looked correct to me because when we're going to put a comma, we're going to give the description, and we're going to end that thought. So I picked no change. But as always, we'll go through the answers. So B, source. So let's just read it and see if this makes sense. And intersections to get their food source, the eucalyptus tree. It doesn't make sense. There needs to be a pause where we're describing something. For letter C, in intersections to get their food source, and then they put a colon, the eucalyptus tree, comma, many of them meet a terrible fate. Now, although the colon might be correct if there was a period after, say, the eucalyptus tree, if this thought ended right here, then it might make a little bit more sense to have that because it would be emphasizing it. But there's this additional part, many of them meet a terrible fate. If we put a colon right here, it kind of, it needs to be, like I said, a list or it needs to be an emphasis. And in this case, it's neither of these. It's not, it may be emphasizing the eucalyptus tree, but it's not talking about they meet a terrible fate. So a colon would be incorrect. And the last one would be a period, and that one wouldn't make sense. In the intersections to get their food source, period, and then there would be this new thought. The eucalyptus tree, many of them meet a terrible fate. That's not even a sentence that makes sense, so that would be incorrect. Best choice would be no change for A. Alright, for number 5. Australian developers have been taking over koala habits to keep up with the country's booming population. Looking at countries for number 5, go ahead and give me your best shot. Go ahead and move into this. So countries right here in the way that it's used is going to be the plural word for countries. And so we're talking about one country here, about Australia, and so no change would be incorrect because we're not using the plural. There's not multiple countries booming population. It's only one. So no change is going to be off the table. Now for B, this is what I initially chose, countries, because it's kind of similar to what we looked at last time. We talked about the people's brain function last time. This time we're looking at the country's booming population. And again, think about this. You can even substitute a name in if that helps you, but who owns the booming population? The country. And so if it's the country's booming population, it's going to be the country, and then we're going to add on this apostrophe S to the word in order to denote the ownership. For C, we know that wouldn't make sense because that's multiple countries is going to be spelled like how it is in the text and not like in C, and we know that that's also incorrect. And for D, that's also incorrect because multiple countries again is spelled like this and not like this, and so that would be incorrect. Moving on to number 6. The writer wants to add the following statistic at point 6 in the passage. There are considered to be less than 80,000 wild koalas left, approximately 1% of what the population was before 1900. So we're going to be put it right after this. This has resulted in the endangerment of the country's most beloved animals, and then we're going to plug in the statistic right here. And so go ahead and give you guys your best shot at what you think the answer would be. All right, let's see what you guys get here. Initially, what I thought about right away is, hey, this statistic's helping to describe it, and so it's asking, should they make this revision? Well, the last one's talking about the endangerment of the animal, and this one's describing it. So I was like, hey, that kind of makes sense. So I think that it should be added. And hopefully you guys are able to make this determination, because if you can determine between yes and no, it'll knock out half the answers. So an easy way to think about this: does it make sense? If I added it in, does it help describe it? In this case, the answer is yes, it does help describe it. And so that helps me kick out C and D in this specific question. Now, when we look at A and D, or A and B, excuse me, A is saying that it's relevant and adds supporting information, and B is saying it adds a sense of urgency. And so let's check, does it add a sense of urgency? Not necessarily. It's just saying that there's less than 80,000 koalas left, which is unfortunately 1% of what the population was. And so this best choice here would be A. It's relevant and it adds supporting information about the endangerment. On to 7. Concerned individuals have taken action by creating koala pathways, routes traveling over roads, highways, and intersections to ensure koalas keep safe. Now, it's going to be right here, talking about this word right here in the punctuation. Go ahead and give your guys your best shot. Alright, I gave you guys a little bit of extra time here, just because this one's a bit of a trick. And initially, it's very easy to see why people might miss this one because, as we talked about earlier, the reasoning and goal of a colon is to create either one, a list, or emphasize two. So, is this creating a list? This is what's asking. Creating koala pathways, routes traveling over roads, highways, and intersections. Okay, you might initially say in your head, yeah, it is creating a list actually. But let's look at it here. First, there's a verb that separates it, which would not help with the case of the colon. And then additionally, there's this extra little thing to ensure koalas keep safe. That kind of takes away from this colon idea. And so hopefully you did not say no change, because that is not the correct answer that we're going to use here. Um, and unfortunately, if you did, the reasoning there is just that the list doesn't start till here, and then again, it has the additional thought at the end, which is typically not going to be inside of a colon list. So just a little tip there. So no change would be incorrect. The second choice B would be using a semicolon, which again, replace it with and see what it says. Concerned individuals have taken action by and creating. That doesn't make sense at all. And then we're left with C and D, and this is going to be determining. This D means BYE means like saying goodbye, like leaving somewhere. That's not what this is talking about. It's talking about C, by creating koala pathways, etc., etc. That's going to be the correct answer. All right, for D. However, koala hospitals have been established in these areas to rehabilitate the injured animals. Let's see what you guys got. Do we need to change this word? And if so, what should it be? All right, get right back into it. So, the previous thing in the rest of the paragraph is talking, or the passage, excuse me, is talking about, helping koalas, how we can keep koalas safe. And this is saying, however, koala hospitals have been established. Well, koala hospitals would be helping them. And so if we're saying however, we're saying that this is a different thought, but this is the same thought. This is, on top of this. So no change is not going to be the correct answer here. Just because we're not taking away from it, we're kind of adding on to it. Hint, hint for the answer here. For B, and koala hospitals have been established in these areas. Okay, yes, it is on top of that, but the previous sentence is talking about creating pathways and routes and highways and intersections. In this sentence, talking about koala hospitals. So two very different thoughts. We would want to use and if it was a cohesive in the sense, and still we don't like to begin sentences with and. And if we are going to, make sure that these two are super cohesive. And in this sense, they're two different ideas. So B is going to be incorrect. In the same sense, C is very similar to B. And maybe that helps you out, that you can say, okay, so and are kind of the same thing. And so you can cancel these two out. But if we're saying so, it means that we're referring to the previous sentence as well. So since we're keeping them safe, there's also been koala hospitals. Okay, that might make a little bit of sense, but we're not talking about making highways in, safer intersections. We're talking about creating new koala hospitals. And so that one's not going to be the best answer. And our best answer would be D in addition to, or just in addition, excuse me. Because we're adding on to this whole idea that, we're ensuring that they're safe, we're making sure that it's, they're going to be able to survive. And in addition, they even have hospitals just in case they do get hit and to save the injured animals. So that's going to be the best answer here. For 9, the writer wants to add the following statement at point 9 in the passage. Several foundations have created awareness projects and look for sponsorship to help re-establish habitats for koalas. That's going to be at point 9, and it's asking, should the writer make this revision? See what you guys got. All right. Here we go. So, let's see. Again, think about this in our head. Think about what we're adding, and it helps eliminate two choices right away. Several foundations have created awareness projects and look for sponsorship to help re-establish habitats for koalas. Now, is this passage talking about re-establishing habitats for koalas? And the answer you should be yelling is yes. It is talking about how can we help koalas. And so right away, like I said, make that distinguish. It's not going to be no. It has to say yes because it makes sense. We're going to add this on because it's a great summarization. Oops. That kind of gives away for A and B, but let's look. A. The statement summarizes the details and helps conclude the steps being taken to help the koala population. Awesome, that's exactly what it's doing. It's talking about there's foundations, awareness projects, sponsorships to help them. Or B. The statement leaves the reader with a positive note about fixing the endangerment of koalas. Maybe they do feel a bit positive because we're quote unquote fixing it with through foundations, but it better explains by talking about it summarizes the details, and it helps talk about the steps that are being taken. So the better answer here would be A. All right, this is kind of a general one here, and again, this is why it's so important to have this main idea in your head before we look at this. So it says, which sentence provides another supporting detail to address the topic of the passage? So again, if you understand what this was about, hopefully you're able to choose the best answer. So let's see what you guys got. All right, jump right back in. This one should be super easy. Guys, let's read through these questions, or these answer choices. Hopefully you're able to eliminate them as we go down. Kangaroos, emus, and wombats are other popular animals in Australia. Does it have anything to do with that? And no, it does not. A is off the table. B. Australia has a diverse population of citizens. You should stop right there. Is this talking about the citizens in Australia? No. Move on to C. Koalas are not bears but marsupials, mammals that carry their young in the pouch. Great. Maybe it is talking about koalas, but does it matter that they're marsupials? No, we're talking about how we need to save them. And finally, D. Australia has erected over 500 koala pathways over the past 2 years. That's exactly what we're talking about. How can we save these koalas, make these pathways? This is a great supporting detail. Let's go ahead and read through this one. Last passage, last 10 questions. We're going to get through this. Let's do it. A study of elementary age children and homework showed that daily homework causes high rates of anxiety and depression in young people. In contrast, schools that have gotten rid of the homework requirement has reported a drop in depression and anxiety among students. According to a nationwide analysis of standardized testing scores, schools that have gotten rid of homework have seen benefits. The results show that the test scores have gone up incrementally from year to year. Schools that maintain daily homework have seen stagnant test scores. Therefore, it is safe to say that homework does nothing to enhance student learning at all. Alright, now, whatever your thoughts are on this passage and the main idea, hopefully we're able to see that it's talking about, using homework or not using homework and if that helps or hurts schools. That's how you should kind of think about right away through your main idea. And so the first question would be, what sentence would best serve as the first sentence of this paragraph? So how can we introduce this better? So I'll go ahead and give you guys some time, and then we'll talk right through it. While most schools implement a system of homework for their students, studies show that homework is not necessary and in many cases harmful for kids. Now, is that the best sentence to serve as an introduction? Probably not, because although it might, relate to some of the things that are going to be later on, it's a way to kind of bias your reader and give them exactly, this is exactly what we're doing, and it's harmful, by the way. It's kind of like a non-introductory phrase. It's not going to help introduce the text. B. The idea of getting rid of homework at the elementary school level is debatable, but giving young children a well-needed break after school is undoubtedly beneficial. Okay, that one may make a little sense. It's like introducing the idea, so let's select it. Let's move on. Research studies have been sparked from the increased level of mental illness associated with school homework at a young age and reveals the negative impacts. Again, it's kind of the same feel as A, where it's like automatically telling you that there's something bad here and not talking about how there's this kind of it's a debate, should we use it, should we not use it, is it going to increase scores? So C is probably not the best answer just because of how relatable it is to A. And again, if there's two answers that do the same thing, they cannot be both right because you can't pick two answers on this test. And finally, D, academic pressure is following children from the schools into their everyday activities and causing mental illness. Now, guys, come on, this is like the same thing as A, C, and D are practically all talking about the same thing. Look at B, it's almost its own idea. It's introducing the ideas. It's talking about how it's debatable. It's going to be the best choice here. Just by looking at, what do they have in common, you can almost knock A, C, and D out and pick B right away. So that should help you out. 2. A study of elementary age children and homework showed that daily homework causes, so we're looking at daily homework and what the punctuation is up in that. So let's see if you guys think there needs to be a change, and if so, what should it be? Looking right here, see what you guys got. All right, great. Again, pause it if I'm not giving you enough time. Hopefully I am, but let's see with this one. A study of elementary age children homework showed that daily homework. So this is a hyphen, and again, hyphens are used only in order to create this kind of, let's see, how would you even say it? Um, like the compound words. Excuse me. So to create a compound word, so two things that come together. Again, I like using eye opener, 22-year-old. These are going to be little references that I use because they're easy to think about, and they come directly from the Smart Edition Academy course. So if you ever need help, need some more help, go to our lessons, get our full online course. It's so helpful. Anyways, let's get back into it. Daily hyphen homework. That's not going to be correct. These two words are not going to be joined together by a hyphen because daily is an adjective for homework. Same idea as the earlier question that we saw more in the 20s. This isn't going to be the right answer because these two, you don't just combine them. That's not how that works. So no change is going to be incorrect. B, show that daily homework, comma, causes high rates of anxiety and depression in young people. Okay, I like that they have daily and homework separated. That seems like the better answer. But having the comma, it has this odd break in the middle of the sentence. Let's read it again. Show that daily homework causes high rates of anxiety. It doesn't really make sense. It should be a full straight-on sentence. Hint, hint. Um, so just kind of a wink there, that should help you out there. C, colon. Remember, colon lists and emphasizes. And if you don't know that it creates a list and emphasizes by the end of this video, I don't know if you're listening or what's going on because I think I've said that 10 times. But regardless, it showed that daily, colon, homework causes of high rates of anxiety and depression in young people. That just doesn't make sense. Read the first sentence that. If it's a colon right here, this needs to be a cohesive sentence. A study of elementary age children and homework showed that daily, that doesn't really make sense. So that's not going to be the answer. So that leaves us D. Let's read it and make sure it makes sense. A study of elementary age children and homework showed that daily homework causes high rates of anxiety and depression in young people. Sounds great. Makes lots of sense. It should just be a normal words, two words together, nothing in between them. All right, for 3. In contrast, schools that have gotten rid of the homework requirement, all right, that's what we're looking at. Should schools, here, 3, be changed? And if so, what should it be changed to? See what you guys got. All right, get right back into it. Initially, right away, if you're just comfortable with how this looks, I thought, okay, schools that have gotten rid of the homework, it's not really being possessive, it's not owning anything. Right away, I picked no change. I think that it sounds very much sense, but let's go through it. Schools and then an apostrophe at the end would indicate that there's multiple schools and there's ownership. And that is not, it's not being owned. It's not saying that is being owned, not at all. So schools with an apostrophe at the end would not make sense because there's no ownership, and although there are multiple schools, there's no ownership there. For 3, or C, excuse me, that would be one school and it having ownership. So we're talking about multiple schools here, so that can knock it off right away. And there's no ownership. That I've gotten rid of homework. There's no ownership of that. And then finally for schools, this one right here, we know that if there's multiple schools and it ends with an S, then we just make it look like B. So if you know that B is correct, but not correct for this specific problem in the sense that the grammar for B, the way that it's written, would be right, then you can know that D would be wrong because you don't put an apostrophe S after an S. You would just do an apostrophe like it is in B. But we know that there's no ownership here, so it just should be schools, just like it is, no change for 3. 4. Schools that have gotten rid of the homework requirement has reported a drop. Okay, so is has correct? And if not, excuse me, what should we change it to? This one, an easy way to do this one is just to read all of the choices and see which one comes off the tongue the best. a great easy way, an easy tip, especially. Oftentimes, if you read things out loud to yourself, you'll catch all the mistakes that you've written, all the mistakes that you have down. So let's do it. Gotten rid of the homework requirement has reported a drop. That's incorrect grammar. It doesn't sound right. Let's try the next one. Gotten rid of the homework requirement have reported a drop. Okay, that one makes sense. I'm going to select it, keep moving on. Have gotten rid of the homework requirement is reported a drop. No, that doesn't make sense. That have gotten rid of the homework requirement are reported a drop. No, that doesn't make sense either. So, and also a little tip here, if it was are, it would be is. If it was is, are would be plural. And if it is has, then it would be have. So these are kind of two pairs. So since it used has, you can kind of say it has to be have. And if it used is, you might have said that it is are. So just a little tip there that we can use here. Okay. So have is going to be the best answer there. And I think this is going to reset. But we'll get 5 and I'll give you guys a bit of time. So it's saying reported a drop in depression. We're looking at number 5 right here. Is this right? Is it wrong? If it is wrong, or it is wrong actually, it's telling you how should we fix this. Has reported a drop in depression and anxiety among students. Let's go through each of the choices. In contrast, schools that have gotten rid of the homework requirement have reported a drop in, this would be a comma, depression would mean there's a break here, which should there be a break here? No, that does not make sense. Reported a drop in depression and anxiety among students. See, when I read it, it doesn't make sense. Another tip, again, read it out loud, see if it makes sense. Now here in, hopefully you know this trick by now, and when we see a semicolon, we put at and in for the semicolon and we read it. We have reported a drop in and depression does not make sense. So B cannot be right. C, have reported a drop in depression and anxiety among students. Sounds good to me. Let's click it. D, has reported a drop in depression and anxiety among students. That wouldn't even make sense. You know, why would we have a period to end the sentence? Having that break would be unnatural. So let's move on to number 6. The answer there would be in depression, C. 6. According to a nationwide analysis of standardized testing, okay, so looks like 6 is not referring to that sentence, so let's back it up a little bit. So it's saying read the passage below and answer the following questions. It's saying 6. Asking here is, should we split these two right here? Should we have this be a paragraph and this be a paragraph? And if so, you know, why would that matter and would that help us? So should the writer put a break in this paragraph? All right, let's get right back into it. So should this be split? Well, let's look at what's before it. So in this, we're talking about how schools have gotten rid of the requirement and it's been a drop in depression and anxiety. This one's talking about how standardized testing in schools has gotten rid and seen benefits and how it's gone up and that some that have daily homework have seen stagnant test scores. So it seems like we're kind of transitioning into this new idea. Here we're talking about like mental health and this one's talking about test scores. And so since these two ideas are going to be separate, your answer should be yes, they should be split. And again, we need to make that determination, is it yes or no, because it's going to split our answers. In this case, it's going to be yes, because we should be splitting them two different thoughts. Now let's read through the two reasonings for the yes. 2 paragraphs would allow the supporting details to be presented in an organized way. Okay, that's true. Let's look at B. Yes, the second paragraph introduces a new topic within the passage. Yes, it does introduce a new topic in the passage. So you might be, okay, I'm stuck between these two because one of them says it allows the supporting details to be presented in an organized way, and this one says the second paragraph would introduce a new topic. And so the best way to decipher here is thinking more specifically about this reasoning, this new topic within the passage. Have we talked about schools getting rid of homework to see benefits? This sentence right here. And your answer is yes, because it says that school gotten rid of homework has reported a drop in depression and anxiety. And so we've already had that idea, we're just re-emphasizing it with scores. So is there a new topic? Maybe about the scores, but the best choice here is talking about how it organizes the supporting details into 2 different paragraphs. And so the best answer is A. B would make a little bit sense, but the best answer here would be A. According to a nationwide analysis of standardized testing scores, schools that have gotten rid of homework have seen benefits. All right, we're looking at this interaction right here. Apologies for my reading mistake, but read it through your own if you can. See if this is correct, and if not, what's the change? Go for it. All right. Just a reminder when we look at it, my initial answer is going to be no change because I saw in no that commas are used to set off an introductory phrase. And I saw that this was introductory. According to a nationwide analysis of standardized testing scores, and then so that's introducing, excuse me, that schools getting rid of homework have seen benefits. And so I knew that the comma was appropriate there. But let's go through them. A colon, you guys should be screaming at this point. A list or emphasizing, this is not creating a list and it's not technically emphasizing, it has an introductory phrase that's being cut off with a comma. Second part, semicolon. You should be yelling again. Semicolon using and. Let's read it. Nationwide analysis of standardized testing scores and schools that have gotten rid of homework. That doesn't make sense. The first part's getting an introduction for the second part. It's not in addition to. And finally, the hyphen, which has not been right all day and most likely will not be correct on your test either. It's very difficult to use. It's used to, like I said, connect those two words. 22-year-old, we often use. It's not going to be this. It's not creating the correct spacing. This is an introductory phrase that needs to be cut off by a comma. Best answer would be A, no change. All right, point 8. So that was our last sentence. Point 8 is going to be right after it. The writer wants to add the following sentence. The analysis measured the average of test scores for all elementary grades when classes were given daily homework versus having no homework assigned. Should the writer make this revision? Yes, no, reasonings. Let's see what you guys got. Remember, first thing is to do, say yes or no, and come up with that reasoning in your head before you even need to read the specific answers. All right, let's see what you guys get. The previous sentence is talking about how getting rid of homework has seen benefits, and the next sentence is talking about how they've gone up incrementally from year to year. And so if we're talking about how this analysis occurred, so it measured the average of test scores for all the grades when classes were given daily homework versus having no homework assigned. Is this relevant? You should be screaming, yes, it is relevant, because this is talking about the results. This is talking about, how it was carried out. It all makes sense. This is an analysis. This is talking about the analysis. You should say, yes, this does make sense. This should be added. So there's that initial, like I said, that reasoning, yes, right away. Okay, so no is going to be out of the question, so it has to be either A or B. A, the passage needs to include more explanation to have a valid argument. Interesting. Now I don't necessarily agree with this claim because before it was even added, it still made sense. It's talking about how they've gone up incrementally from year to year. So I don't think it's necessary in order to have a greater explanation and to make it quote unquote more valid. So let's go to B and see if that explains it better. The sentence elaborates on the study and properly transitions the sentence before and after its placement. Perfect. We just talked about that, how it talks about the analysis. This is about the analysis. This is about the results. Great transition. Helps elaborate on the study. Best answer would be B, yes. The results shown that the test scores have gone up incrementally from year to year. Okay, we have a 9 here. Schools that mandate daily homework have seen stagnant test scores. Which transition, if any, should the author insert at point 9 at the passage? All right, see what you guys get. What is this sentence doing? And that's a question that you can kind of ask yourself if you're kind of stuck here. Schools that mandate daily homework have seen stagnant test scores. Okay, so throughout this study, we've talked about how homework causes depression, getting rid of it, drop of depression, getting rid of it, benefits, they've gone up. And now all of a sudden we're talking about how those that mandate it have stagnant test scores. So it's almost like pulling away from it, it's taking away from it, it's giving the opposite side. And that kind of gives the answer right away. But if you can do that in your head, that's exactly why that's so important. If you can relate this sentence to the rest of the passage, it should be super easy what the correct answer would be. So given that information, no change would not be the best choice. B, on the contrary would be the best choice, the one that I chose, because on the contrast, that just means, on the contrary just means, contrasting. On the other hand is kind of a similar word for that. So on the contrary to that, schools that mandate daily homework have seen stagnant test scores. It's kind of supporting it because it's saying, on the other side, having the homework makes it worse, or in this case, it stay the same. And would be talking like we talked about earlier. It's not really cohesive with the last sentence, and so are very similar. If you see them both, probably are not going to be either of them because they're kind of doing the same thing. Because so would also be referring to the previous sentence, which would mean it would need to be cohesive. Best answer, B. On the contrary, 10. Therefore, it is safe to say that homework does nothing to enhance student learning at all. Okay. The writer wants to improve the passage by editing the sentence after point 10. What should the writer do? Alright, so the choices are rewrite it because it's off topic, rewrite it because it has improper language, rewrite it because it displays faulty reasoning, or delete it because the sentence does not effectively summarize the passage. Let's see what you got. Alright, should we rewrite it because it's off topic? No, that's incorrect. This is definitely on topic. And although I agree that we need to rewrite it, um, it's safe to say that homework does nothing to enhance student learning at all. Is it talking about homework? Is it talking about student learning? Yes, it's not off topic. So that one's going to be incorrect. B, rewrite it because sentence has improper language conventions. When I read it, this is kind of the process that I had in my head. Is it improper language in its way? Is there any grammar mistakes that I see initially? It is safe to say that homework does nothing to enhance student learning at all. No, that sounds like a normal sentence. Do I think that she should rewrite it? Once again, yes, but is it because it has improper language conventions? No. C, rewrite it because the sentence displays faulty reasoning. Now that is the one that I chose, is C, because it almost makes this dramatic, meta statement at the end. It's safe to say that homework does nothing to enhance student learning at all. Now we know that that's not true. Just because of this one study, this analysis of standardized testing, and that some schools that mandated it hadn't seen very many growth, doesn't mean that it's safe to say that it does nothing at all. That's not necessarily true, and it's displaying, like it says here, faulty reasoning. But we'll check D, just to finish it off. It says delete it because the sentence does not effectively summarize the passage. And that might be true. It might not effectively, in this current state, summarize the passage. But if we rewrote it to summarize everything, it would make more sense. And if it's talking about editing the sentence, it's best to fix the sentence rather than just delete it and leave it without a conclusion. And so that's going to be our final answer, is C, rewrite it because the sentence displays faulty reasoning. All right. Thank you for watching this video with me and staying without me throughout this whole entire test. Just a reminder that you can take this entire PSAT 8 to 9 practice test for free using that link in the description below. And again, in the description below, you can also find a link to the PSAT 8 to 9 online study course with additional practice tests, study lessons, videos, and even more. And I wish you guys the best of luck on your exam, and thank you for listening with me today.